Welcome, everyone, to Quantifying the Technology Deficit of Multifamily Properties as Revealed by COVID. I'm Jeff Koch. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and Chief Information Officer for Mill Creek Residential. And I'm very excited to be here today talking with you all. There's just so much that's been happening over the last few months that's, I know, a challenge for us in our industries, a challenge for us how we work and operate at home. And today is just a day where I'm going to get to share a little bit of the gaps in technology, the bandwidth constraints, business continuity, planning capacity, how we really move forward through this whole process of what is this technology deficit and how do we understand it, and what has COVID done to us? What has it revealed in this process? And so just a little bit about myself and Mill Creek. I've been at Mill Creek for 5 years. I run the information technology team for the organization. I also run our innovation lab, which focuses on the future, what's coming, what does the industry really need in a way of quantifying technology and the value of it and the return on investment of it. It's like a think tank, so to speak. I also run our ESG group, which is our environmental, social governance organization, and really getting into the sustainability of our assets, understanding the social aspects of how we give back, how we are diversified, inclusive within our organization, what our governance looks like, how we govern by ethics. And then I also run cybersecurity, and that's a major focus of mine. Actually, in a prior life, before I came into the multifamily world, I actually came from a global chemical manufacturer, Fortune 500, where I was their chief information security officer, and I ran cybersecurity globally and fought nation states on a daily basis. And so a lot of what I come at and think about is how do we continue to drive data privacy, data security throughout our buildings across the nation. So Mill Creek, we own and operate, we're a developer, construction, general contractor, and a property manager of about 20,000 units across the US with a growing pipeline of about another 13,000 units. We spun off from Trammell Crow in 2011 and went from 70 people to just about 1,000 people today in size. My team was created a few years back, really with the idea of how do we create a competitive advantage using technology. And so we started looking at things from the back office, the accounting suite, the financial standards, reporting, all those things, all the way through to the front end of community technology. And we started driving forward a team of innovation focused on what do the communities need in order to operate, to enable them, to empower them to drive revenue, to drive cost savings, cost avoidance, those things. And so that community technology has been really my bread and butter baby, so to speak, to really drive forward a lot of the thoughts that we're going to go through today. It's been really fun building out that group, designing from the early onsets of development through into construction, into property management, into asset management, looking at the whole life cycle of a building, a community where people live, where residents live. And so our first and foremost thought is, what are we doing to drive value to that asset? And so we want to understand the value. That does it improve the resident experience, and does it provide some sort of financial outcome to Mill Creek as a whole? And so today I'm talking through that lens with you all about the quantifying that technology deficit. And I think a lot of us, as COVID hit back in April and March, we really started to see that we had some of these weaknesses and we didn't have the necessary bandwidth, or we didn't have the infrastructure. We weren't operationally set up really ready for all of this. And so, as I talk to my peers and read a bunch of articles across the industry, I think this is a common thread of gaps. And so I want to talk through each one of those. Then we get into business continuity and what it means to keep our sites running, even in situations where we can't necessarily be there physically. And then capacity planning. What does the future look like for us with bandwidth, 5G, other things that are coming, people, resources, those type of things. So let's dive into it and kind of talk through a couple of these gaps. I want to start off on bandwidth because I think this is really important as we look to the future. We clearly have a shortage of bandwidth available across the US. And so while it may be different in different asset classes, such as, Class A apartments, Class B, C, D, bandwidth is incredibly important. And I think COVID revealed that to us, that we saw a surge in internet traffic by 50 to 70% due to COVID. And we saw streaming services go up 12%. And so there was a massive need for bandwidth. And you had people working from home, you had people going through this process of, how do I operate day in and day out from my home, doing the job I have, teaching my kids school remotely, doing all this, right? So that just the need of bandwidth grew and grew. And a lot of us were held flat footed, or our contracts didn't allow for flexibility, whatever the case may be. And so I want to kind of go through some of that, just a step back of some statistics. When you think about the shortage, just watching a 1080p video online consumes about 3.4 gigabits of data per hour. Okay. Video streaming a 4K video is about 15.98 gig an hour. And so if you just start computing some of those statistics, your usage of data greatly goes up. And so it's really important for us as owner operators to start thinking through the lens of, what do our residents ultimately need, and how do we build not only the base infrastructure correctly with regards to bandwidth, but how do we scale it as time goes on? And then what does the median usage look like? So I just ran some statistics and saw that the median usage was across the US was 145.2 gig per household in 2018. That was up from 103.6 gig in 2017. So you can just see that the bandwidth needs are ever increasing for people. And so as we go into new developments, we need to be thinking about, okay, are we going to do this bulk? Are we going to do this with a retail bandwidth perspective, where the resident goes directly to the Verizons, AT&Ts, Comcasts, et cetera, to get their internet? Or are we as owner operators going to provide bulk to them of a high quality, high speed network? And so as we go through that decision process, I think one of the gaps we want to identify is, what are we trying to provide, right? And what does the resident need? But then you have to think about it from your own perspective. What's the revenue opportunity for us? And so when you start thinking about what residents are going to be doing in the future, what our new normal looks like, I think we need to be consuming more and more bandwidth. And so you're looking at 1 gig packages. But one of the things I caution people on is understanding how that works. There's a term in bandwidth called synchronous. And so it talks about what is your download speed and what is your upload speed. If it's synchronous, those two are the same, right? So is it 1 gig down and 1 gig up? Or is it 1 gig down and only 35 megabits per second up? So something to think about as you go through these contracts, because it's really important. Upload speed, FaceTime, videos, Zoom calls, those all use your upload speed. If you're talking on the phone over the internet, that's using your upload speed. And so more and more residents, we need to make sure we're focusing not only on the download speed of them being able to watch streaming videos and YouTube or whatever it may be, we need to be thinking about the upload speed. And so that all comes back then into kind of the next section of opportunity, which I think there's a big gap. And I think one of those possibilities is bulk internet, right? And so if a owner operator is able to push out bulk internet to their residents, we're able to blanket an entire property, make sure everything's flawless, have good services, good service level agreements to make sure that works well, and really drive an incredible opportunity for revenue. You may get those packages in, let's say, for $30 a unit per month, and you resell them for $55 a unit per month, which is still below the retail value if they were to go out there on their own. And so I think that's something we want to think about as an industry, is what does the future look like? That may also enable a whole bunch of other services I'm going to talk about through today's talk, because I think there's a lot of value there. So, but this all funnels back down into infrastructure. So as you think about your infrastructure and your buildings, there are different ways of looking at it. There's the new builds, there's the retrofits. Well, if you're already out there operating as a community, how do I go forward and actively innovate, right? And looking at it and being creative and finding creative partners is going to be incredibly important to this industry as we go forward, because we were somewhat flat-footed in certain areas, and now we need to make sure we bolster that infrastructure so that we have the versatility and the scalability on the go forward. And so when I think about infrastructure, I think about access control. I think about community-wide networks, whether those be Wi-Fi networks, whether those be 5G IoT networks, or Z-Wave or Zigbee, all the different types of protocols that are out there. A community-wide network really enables you for a whole lot of different things, and that's what's really important. But making sure that the technologies that you're looking at can tie into that community-wide network. And do you have a proper set of controls around that and management of that? I think that's a real gap. Is we're looking at our networks today, and we don't have that 24/7 monitoring on those networks. We don't have that seamless white glove service for if a resident has an issue or your operations staff has an issue, how they solve that. And so I think that's a big gap. And then with access control, just seamless access, just thinking about the idea of my garage entry to my building entry to guest entry to my unit entry to common area spaces, is that all seamless to the resident and their guests? How do we solve the problem for package lockers, those type of things? And so I think there's a lot of gaps there that need to be identified and solved, and there are some great solutions out there today around access control, both from a new build and a retrofit perspective, that can really help enhance your property. Not only does it provide a seamless access, it also starts solving the issues for self-touring, which is a growing trend due to COVID, right? That more and more people want to go through buildings on their own time. They want to be able to schedule at the time they want to come to the facility, and then they want to go and look at that unit on their own accord. And so if we can tie all that back into technology and build this infrastructure layer together, we can enable them to do that. And so, but what's the ROI again, right? And so quantifying that and taking the steps appropriately is going to be necessary. But when you think about all these things on the infrastructure side, one of the other areas that I caution a lot of people on, and I want to caution y'all today, is around cybersecurity. There's a major gap within our communities as a whole about looking at the cybersecurity element. And not just from a, hey, do I have my back office protected? Do I have two-factor authentication? Do I have some sort of network monitoring service in place? Do I have a security event management system? There's so many different things out there that need to tie into cybersecurity, but are you protecting your IoT network? Are you protecting the resident and their data? What are you doing there to build confidence with them? And so, are you monitoring those networks? Are we making sure that those networks are protected? Other things we're starting to see that were trends before COVID that are now light is shining on them even more is in the insurance space. I think we're seeing, just look at water insurance. Deductibles are rising, premiums are rising. We've had a lot of bad flooding over the last couple years with Harvey and some others that have really affected the water insurance industry. But as you start going through, and what COVID's showing is that, well, we don't necessarily have the infrastructure in place at some of these places to augment this other trend of water insurance. And so, I've heard things around the industry around, insurance companies not willing to underwrite certain assets if they don't have water leak detection in place. And so water leak detection being one of those IoT, Internet of Things services that you can plug into your community network and monitor the usage of water, the detection of a leak, those type of things. And so insurance companies, I think, are going to be pressing for that. And so as we start to quantify that risk, if we don't have these technologies in place, we may not get the property properly insured. And so I think about that as a gap that needs to be resolved. And when we start quantifying that gap, there's a massive return on investment for that. When you just think about what a insurance claim could be on water damage, by the time you detect it, it's already gone down into a unit below, and now you have multiple repairs that are necessary. You can get up in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs right away. And if deductibles are increasing, you might pay off that system in one possible outage or incident that occurred. So that's something we want to think about from that side too. Then you get into energy management, and it's just amazing to see what we can do with energy management. But I don't think a lot of us are fully capitalizing on that. When you start thinking about these devices that are in your network, the thermostats, are we putting in smart devices, LED lighting, understanding what's happening from an energy perspective? Because not only can we as an owner operator save for the common areas of which we pay, but we can save our residents money. Statistics show that the average thermostat can lower a bill, average smart thermostat can lower a bill by 8 to 10%. And so if you start thinking about that applied to the square footage of your common area or clubhouse or applied to the resident, that's some significant savings to individuals. And I think that's important for us to think about that lens too, not just the revenue opportunity, but the cost savings opportunity that does increase your profitability and your NOI in the end. And so I think it's really important that we look at energy management from different lenses and make sure we're identifying how we move forward with that as a whole. But I think as we go forward into thinking about what COVID showed, I think a lot of light was shined on the operational side of things, right? So how we do leasing, the use of artificial intelligence up front in the leasing process, right? So there's systems out there that you can chat with them and understand exactly what you're looking for. They can even schedule the self tour for you. They can go forward into this place, but it doesn't always have to be technology. There can also be manual processes that go for that. But do we have good contingency plans in place to really fix the leasing process and take advantage of that and streamline it, which could lead to reduction in cost for us as owner operators? It could increase traffic to the communities, which would in turn hopefully increase our rent percent up, and how quickly we can get places rented. So I think that's important too. Common area cleaning is a new one, right? So as COVID shows, the common areas, all of our amenities, the pool, the gym, all those things, how are we cleaning them? Are there technologies out there that can purify the air, that can circulate it better and clean it, that can actually go in and clean the machines and make people feel safe? And so as we look at these gaps, we can start saying, okay, well, if we're going to ever open our amenities back up, or we're going to slowly open them up, can we quantify the number of people that are in there? Can we understand what that is? And so there's a gap there that COVID clearly showed that, hey, if we're going to keep using these amenities as a means of revenue to us, then we need to be able to make sure we can operate them safely. Package delivery is a big one right now. So, as everyone's staying home, they're ordering more online. They're looking around at their house and saying, "Hey, these decorations I want to change." Click on Amazon, it gets delivered, right? Buy something on eBay, whatever the case is. But once it gets to the building, are we still doing package lockers? Are we doing concierge services that take the package up? Are you doing something like a different type of delivery technology that goes all the way to the unit? And so I think it's important for us to start identifying, what's that service and how can we enhance that service for the resident, and drive that forward. I think COVID showed that just leaving a bunch of packages in one place may congregate people more. And so there's some opportunities there for us to continue to keep safe deliveries and process. You look at all your amenities as a service, your pet care, your ride share, your cleaners, your dry cleaners, your food delivery, all these things. How do we properly do those safely? And so while there is sometimes revenue shared tied to those, a lot of it is just the resident experience and residents wanting that convenience factor in their life. And so it's our job as owner operators to make sure that we're providing that. And I think COVID shined a lot of light on how do we do that safely, and what should that process be. And so you get into other things like short-term rentals and co-working spaces and just a bunch of gaps that are clearly shown there as to if people aren't able to congregate together, if we have to keep social distancing in place, what does this do to the money that's tied to those? And there's a deficit there that we need to be able to quantify and look through and make sure that we're able to appropriately pull all those people in, and do it safely for short-term rentals, for co-working spaces, because I think those services are incredible. Especially as we have more people working from home, co-working spaces may be more necessary. They don't want to work up in their unit and home because they have the kids up there and they want to come downstairs, but they don't want to drive to the office. And so what does that look like? How do we keep that clean? How do we charge accordingly to it? So it all comes down to the business continuity planning. What happens when your on-site staff or maintenance staff or leasing staff, they get sick, or they need to help roll out some of these services, or they need to help with self-touring or those type of things? Do we have appropriate business continuity plans in place and backed up and tested? Are we actually doing that on a regular? There's these things called tabletop exercises where you can go through scenarios, much like a pandemic, and say, okay, let's walk through this scenario, make sure we have everything in place for how this goes forward. And so I think as we look at the bandwidth, the infrastructure, and the operational technologies out there, I think we want to look at it through that lens of how do we continue these in this situation, and what does this mean to us from a value to the resident, from a revenue opportunity to us, from a cost savings opportunity to us or to the resident, and how does it affect NOI? And so when you start pulling some of the math together and understanding the statistics, I think there's a lot of tremendous value in a lot of these services, but how do we scale it? How do we put in the appropriate planning for place? And I think this is where using third parties, using trusted partners, having discussions with industry peers, creating roundtables to discuss these things are going to be important for our time forward, as there's so many options out there, a lot of businesses, but are they all stable? That's a big question right now that I think COVID showed us, is especially in the short-term rental market, we saw some big companies shut down, and that's a big concern. But is that the long term, right? Or is it temporary? And so while I think there's a lot of opportunity for startups to come into this space, I think we as owner operators need to be cautious and make sure that we're doing the diligence on all those partnerships and understanding their scalability, growth plans, business continuity, capacity planning, et cetera, for their growth forward too. And so, I think there's a lot to be said about this technology deficit, because I think there's a lot of value that can be provided to these communities. But it takes some creative thinking. It takes some stepping back and not just looking at show me the bottom line or the top line. It's that plus X, right? And it may circle back in a different way. When you think about energy management, it's one of the best ways to think about this. It's not a direct, I'm going to get a top line revenue dollar. It is, I'm going to save X thousands of dollars in this bill, which then allows my profitability to increase. Or, hey, I was able to save the resident 10%. Therefore, they may be more applicable to this rent or to this other amenity or whatever the case is. We can think about things a little bit more creatively to really fill in those number gaps and help understand the true value to us. And so I really appreciate the time today. I appreciate you guys listening to me. I'd love to follow up with people. I think education about all these different topics is one of the most important things that we can do for each other during this time, to really help each other out, to drive forward the best opportunity for our companies, for our residents, as we really enhance the people's lives that live and operate at our communities. So thank you very much for the time, and I look forward to talking with you all again.